Hi there, I'm Andrew Stanton, the director of WhaaLee, also one of its writers. I guess the first question that would come up for this film is why Hello Dolly? There's a bit of a story behind that. I had sort of come up with this idea of using old 30s French swing music over the image of space. There was something about juxtaposing sci-fi and the future with retro old stuff. I just loved that combination. It just felt fresh. I felt like I'd never seen those two flavors put together before. I'm sure they have, but it didn't seem that common to me. I had that for a long time. And then I was watching Triplets of Belleville, which is an amazing animated movie that was sadly up against Nemo at the time for a lot of awards and stuff. But I was a huge fan of it. And they open with French swing music. And it's somewhat of a pantomime film. There's not a lot of dialogue. And I just thought, oh, geez, somebody's going to think I've copied them or sort of plagiarizing or something. So it made me go back to the drawing board and think about what else could I put in front that would give the same feel. I did a lot of theater in high school and made a lot of movies in my backyard. One of the standard musicals that we had to do in high school was Hello Dolly. And I remember I was sort of trolling through iTunes, I think it was, and suddenly recalled that song, or at least songs from it. And I just started listening to it. And suddenly this song comes up, Put on Your Sunday Clothes, and it opens with the phrase out there. It has this great build to it. And suddenly, since I'd already knew I was going to be pushing in on Earth in this sort of dystopian post-evacuation view, I just couldn't get the idea out of my head of what would these two things feel like together. So I put them together, and lo and behold, you get exactly what you see. And it made me start looking into the other songs in the movie and stumbled across It Only Takes a Moment, which is the song with the two lovers, and that suddenly became another great storytelling device for me later in the film. And then I was just hooked. From then on, it was there was no other options. I wasn't looking anywhere else. And one of the things when you make a movie with very little dialogue in it, or with what I like to say unconventional dialogue, you're forced to get your storytelling and information from all the other elements in the movie: how the character moves, how the music is, what the lighting does. I mean, in any good film, all those elements will do something for the story. But in this case, they had to fill in the gap for lack of dialogue. And so when you can find fresh devices like a song or even video that can also tell you more about the story, whether it's emotionally or narratively, you grab onto it. So it was a match made in heaven. I certainly can't imagine the film any other way now. Everybody curses me at work now because they can't get the song Put on Your Sunday Clothes out of their head after 3 or 4 years working on it. It's the price you pay working on movies. So a lot of people also wonder, was there some sort of message to this movie that we were trying to say? Are we trying to be preachy or environmental or ecological? These are all noble things to support, but to be honest, I didn't have any agenda. I'm not that kind of a person, and pretty quiet about my political opinions about things and all that kind of stuff. What I had all along that Pete Docter and I had come across years and years ago, almost 15 years ago, was the idea of a robot that was left alone on Earth and didn't know it could stop doing what it was doing. What if it just kept doing its job for hundreds of years, having no idea it could stop? So that forced me to come up with some sort of backstory that made sense. And I don't know why. I guess I can't remember where the idea came from. I think we always had a character that compacted trash. I don't even remember there being debate about that. It just seemed so sad. Sort of lowest on the totem pole, sort of just sort of like almost a janitorial job. We never even questioned that. So then I had to think backwards. I had to sort of reverse engineer and go, why would the world be covered in trash? In fact, that was the original working title of this idea, Trash Planet. We actually had that title for almost 10 years. And I don't know, you just kind of look at the state of the world as it is, and you just sort of extrapolate a little bit off of the elements that you have, and you go, well, if we keep buying too much and throwing it all away, sooner or later there won't be enough places to put it all, and once there's no room, what would you have to do? Well, one of the things might be that you'd have to sort of leave the planet and make room for everything to get cleaned up so you can kind of move back in. So we just went with that simple logic. Sadly, things just got more timely with the rest of the world as we were making this film. I really never wished anything to be that prophetic in any way. I'm sure some more jaded people won't believe that was all the only reason I went here, but it really was. I mean, we certainly have a lot of fun poking at large corporations. We work for one, we've become one ourselves, and you're your own worst enemy sometimes. And so you can pick your poison, but everybody it sort of already sees it happen in different parts of life, of consumerism kind of almost governing how you run your life. And so we just jumped in time for however many hundreds of years of what if, a company was the government. And I think it was one of our artists, Teddy Newton, that came up with the term by and large corporation. And I thought that was just genius. And then being able to sort of truncate it to the acronym of B&L, it just sort of tripped off the tongue real easily. That's sort of how that all came to being. And then we just have, fun coming up with all sorts of ways that could be a little distorted and bizarre, a little gross for things everything's got a label on it. Everything's been sort of thought of. Okay, here we are in WhaaLee's truck. This was always another thing we always kind of had, was WhaaLee would have some sort of safe haven where he was I always thought of him like a beachcomber, a character that collected things because he didn't understand what the world was before humanity left. He probably only knew the world post humanity's exodus. So it was a great way, story-wise, to just show his curiosity, show how he's evolved some sort of sensitivity and emotion. And it's just appealing. It was really easy for us to all sort of collectively, when we were in art or story, to call back on things that fascinated us as a kid. I always remember rummaging through my mom's kitchen and looking at all the utensils and wondering, what does this egg slicer really do? Or what does this egg beater? I didn't know what the terms were, but they were so fascinating, their devices. And so we'd sort of make this list and go through all the things. I remember thinking like an eyelash curler must be this horrible torture device. And so you try to come up with all these lists of things that feel very true to the curiosity of a child, but also would read very quickly on screen, and you'd be able to see what it was and get what it was. Man, we had to come up with a lot. I'd say for every one item that you actually see in this truck, there's probably 25 to 30 that you never get appreciated that are really in there. I mean, all those shelves truly rotate. They all have different items in each of one of them, and they all have a little bit of a story behind them. I'm sure some art of book or behind the scenes things will eventually show off that. But that's the kind of cool stuff. It's almost like in real life, when you get great props, you just kind of know they're there, and they help the scene, they help the actor, they help the mood. Everything feels a little bit more authentic. The truck kind of came a little later. It's definitely off of all of our childhood love of Tonka trucks. We sort of wanted that Tonka truck feel. Again, one of the toughest things about the front of this film was I had to tell not only what's going on now, but what had happened. And every inch of it's the future. So how do you tell a history that's already over, that nobody knows about, and then also tell you what's going on right now? So this was a really tough nut to crack. We had to basically think out how everything really, really happened. You had to figure out how all of these WhaaLees would be stored up in this truck and box up and put into these racks, almost like a Sparkletts water truck, and it would be able to sort of drive over all terrains and then let them out like army ants so they could get in all the nooks and crannies and anywhere that there was trash, and be able to sort of box it all up, stack it into some sort of orderly fashion. So we figured, well, to make room, they would just stack higher and higher and have to make sort of rampways for themselves out of the cubes to be able to get up and down. And then in would come these much larger industrial sort of tank-like machines. We'd call them incinerators, that were massive, the size of half a city block and about 10 to 15 stories high, with these massive cranes. And they would slowly slice down the towers and incinerate them. So it all made a little bit of sense to us about what was actually going on before it all shut down. So here's a typical day at work for WhaaLee. I really wanted everybody to see what life was like for WhaaLee, just for one small moment before everything changes. And try to get across through the walk home and through this moment of just a typical day of collecting trash and finding items, that you'd really get to sort of experience for yourself viscerally what it was like for him every day for close to 700 years. He's really the ultimate definition of futility for me. That's really what WhaaLee was. He I think that's why I really could relate to him, and people hopefully start to relate to him, is if you're doing the same thing day in and day out, year after year, at some point you have to just start asking the question, is there more to life than what I'm doing? And I think because we take WhaaLee to such an extreme, even though he's just a machine, you can't help but imbue him with that thought process. You can't help but empathize and assume he must be thinking that. And so I think when he looks up at the stars, when he first comes home at the end of that day, we do a pretty successful job, I think, of making you get that that's what's going on in his head, even though he can't express that verbally. I always knew that I wanted him to discover a plant, and I can't tell you why. Again, it had nothing to do with being ecological or anything. I was so enamored by his tenacity, by his perseverance. It's like he's like the ultimate definition of perseverance as well. And I just kept picturing this dandelion pushing through a cement sidewalk. It's like all this man-made cement, all this man-made stuff trying to force something organic and natural to just not exist anymore, and it still perseveres. It just pushes through the cracks, and it's gorgeous, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. And to me, that was WhaaLee. It's like for all the man-made mess and the man-made quality of just him himself and all of real life leaving the planet, his desire to know life and to fall in love just comes. It took 700 years, but it still came up through the cement. So something about that, I wanted him to find the equivalent of that. I really wanted him to find something real in life. And I couldn't think of anything more real than finding life, finding a plant. So in a weird way, I came up with that and had no idea where to go with it. Here's another scene that I always had in my head. This movie, this idea sat dormant for almost 12 years. And it wasn't until I was writing on Finding Nemo and I had to do rewrites, and I really was kind of tired of writing on it, and I would beg for office time to sit in my room and write, and then I would just procrastinate. I would just start playing music and throwing pencils in the ceiling. And some soundtrack music came on. I think it was for some Jerry Goldsmith score, and it just suddenly I started thinking of WhaaLee, this old idea we had, and I had the picture of this laser light dot suddenly just showing up on the ground. And how weird that would be for somebody if you had never seen one in your life and wondering what it is. We've seen people do that with their dogs and their pets, and they think it's alive, and they start to sort of freak out and chase it. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be cool if he sort of chased this dot? And slowly, you would let the audience in and know that all these other dots were starting to come in and surround him. And then you find out that it's actually a spaceship triangulating for a flat space to land on. And it's kind of wild still for me, even after we've been working on it intensely for this long, to watch it, because it kind of dropped from the sky so clearly to me in my head about what that would feel like, what that would look like. And this is one of those rare sequences where it's exactly what I pictured, or it exceeds it. And that's not often that you get that kind of satisfaction as a filmmaker, because you have to basically instruct an army of people to all follow the same vision, and it's hard enough to communicate it, let alone get everybody to coordinate. So usually it ends up changing or morphing into something else or evolving, hopefully always for the better. But this ship landing moment really it's like somebody went into my head and just pulled it right out. We're now getting close up to the moment of Eve coming out. Eve was really fun. I had the luxury at the beginning of working on this film. Usually you have about, I'd say, out of a 4-year process, your first year you get to spend kind of relaxing if you've already made a film here at Pixar, just sort of taking your time, relaxing a bit, and maybe going on vacation and incorporating in it some sort of development research. For Ratatouille, they went to Paris. got to see the sites and look at kitchens and look at cooking. And for cars, they went on Route 66. Because this was fantasy and it was all made up, and I knew that I was going to have a tough time selling just to myself, let alone to anybody else, that you could make a film work feature length with a character that didn't speak conventionally, that I would need to have to prove that. And because I kind of understood pretty clearly what I wanted for the first act of the movie, I decided to use all my development dollars and take the best story guys I could who just miraculously were free. They weren't busy on another project. I got Ronnie Del Carmen, Peter Sohn, and my brother Nate Stanton. And then I got 2 editors, Axel Geddes and Nick Smith. And it was just a tight group of us. And we spent the entire 6-7 months just simply boarding the first act of the movie. I hadn't even written the script fully. I sort of quickly outlined it. And we sort of stumbled through it with no pressure because nobody knew I was doing this. So I didn't have to present it to anybody. I didn't have to give anything special treatment other than just it was our own private little experiment. And that was great. Not only were these guys fast and really, really good, because we were small, we could really change things very quickly. We could go left if we've been going right the whole time. We could just change our minds and switch things around and really explore, and had a lot of time that you usually don't have in production to find things in editorial. And I got to say, in those first 6 to 7 months, it really defined the look and the feel and the tone of this movie. I can't say that I really understood fully what it was I wanted, but I could almost like smell it. I could almost feel it out there. And that 6-7 months of development with those guys of sort of being in a mini production really afforded me the luxury of discovering what the feel of this movie was, because I knew I wanted something different. I wanted something that I had never not only seen before, but experienced before. I just felt really strongly that there was so many more ways to go with an animated picture than anybody had done, and I wanted to at least tap into one of those directions. And so in a way, this was just as scary and as exciting of a venture as, frankly, Toy Story, which was the last time I remember feeling that same way of like, there's got to be a different way to make an animated film. The other thing that came out of that 6-7 months is I didn't have anybody else in the crew. I didn't have art departments. I didn't have anybody else. So we had to come up with our own designs for what WhaaLee would look like, what Eve would look like. So that allowed us, fortunately, all these guys not only were great storyboard men, but they were incredible artists. So I could turn them into an art crew. We could suddenly decide to spend that afternoon and sit around a table together and all sketch. And I remember one of the things I asked everybody to do was go out and sort of through magazines, online, or wherever you saw pictures, or take photos yourself of machines that seemed to have a personality. Not machines that were designed to look like a character, but just things when you looked at them, whether I don't care if it was a washing machine, a vacuum, a train, a car, if you saw a face in it, if you saw a personality in it, just let's collect it, because that was really big for me. I wanted that Luxo feel. I really wanted that Luxo lamp feel where you saw it as an appliance first, and then you read character into it. And I wanted that to be the case for both WhaaLee and Eve. Now, granted, WhaaLee and Eve have both been given a little bit more design and anthropomorphic sort of slant so that they can carry all the things they have to communicate through the whole film, but we did it very begrudgingly. Like, I would not let WhaaLee have elbows. I would not let WhaaLee have things that felt like real legs. I wanted him to work with his limitations, and I didn't want him to accidentally, in a pose, suddenly look like a person and look like he could pose like a person. He had to pose like WhaaLee poses. And same with Eve. But they had to have just enough options that if the only way to describe something was the way a human poses it, I could use elements of them to do it. So when we were doing those designs together, one of the nice things is because they got designed together, we could really play the opposites. You could play WhaaLee as a box, as a fundamental symbol, and Eve as a circle. I remember going a long time ago, probably in '93, to Peter Gabriel's Secret World Tour, and he designed the stage so that one side was about the male and the other side was about the female, and one side was square and the other stage was circular. And I always thought that was fascinating, and he sort of decided which songs would be played, whether they were a female song or a male song in their field on either of those stages. And I never forgot that iconography. And that really did kind of influence a little bit the fundamental nature of each of these characters. The other thing was that just the design, we wanted to be able to play in both spectrums of robotics, really high-end technology and really low technology. So WhaaLee I always call a tractor. Eve I always call sort of like a Porsche. It's like she's the highest, most expensive, no expense spared kind of project that the by and large corporation could use to make a probe droid. It's so advanced we don't even understand how she can float and how these appendages can sort of magnetically sort of be close to one another and things can separate, but it feels like it has a logic behind it. WhaaLee is much more nuts and bolts, and you can kind of get how he works from afar. And we just have found a lot of fun discoveries. We found, putting the sort of dump truck back to him made him feel like he had a backpack like a little kid. But first and foremost, he had to compact trash into a cube. Like, no matter what we did, he had to do that. I was so enamored by Luxo and the power that short film still had after almost 20 years that I thought, well, could you carry a whole film expression-wise with something that simple like a cone lamp? But I realized that really would limit it too much. For a short film, yes. For a feature film, probably no. And I was at a Red Sox-A's game. I think it was November of 2003. Might even have been a playoff game. I remember my editor on Nemo, David Salter, I asked him to hand me his binoculars so I could watch the game. And then I sort of started noticing the binoculars, and I looked down at them. And it just all came back to me as a kid playing with my dad's binoculars and how you could sort of bend them up and down and make them sad, then happy, sad, then happy. And it just hit me. I thought, that's exactly it. That's how you could also get the swivel up and down that you get from Luxo, but then from a straight-on view, you could get other subtleties of their acting to get more emotion out of it. And it didn't need anything else. It didn't need a mouth, didn't need a nose, didn't anything to sort of represent expression and emotion and a face of any sort. And I loved the fact that it could stay that removed from a real face. And that you could, again, see it as mechanics first. That was it. Once I saw that, I said, okay, I stick that on top of this trash compacting box, and that's the character. And I didn't want to use the same function to sell other robots. I wanted that to be unique to WhaaLee. I mean, it almost gives him a Buster Keaton quality. He has this stone face, sad eyes quality that I really think is part of his appeal. I mean, he was a master. You can't improve upon him. And so I wanted Eve on the other end of it to have a different way to express herself. And I thought, well, since we can do high technology, I loved the idea of having this almost high-end, light, bright kind of face where the eyes could almost animate. You could squash and stretch them. They can move around and give you expression in a different way, but still limited, really limited. Again, no mouth, no nose, nothing else. And they, again, complemented each other for being two ends of the spectrum. And all of that came out of this little team of guys before I ever got the entire crew on. So I really lucked out that a lot of the key things to this movie, the tone, the feel of it, the design of these two characters, really kind of got nailed in a year that really nobody would have gotten mad at me if all I did was spend money and go travel around and try to get inspired for the next film I wanted to do. And thank God I did, because the hardest part of this film was figuring out the rest of the story, figuring out how to make the rest of this movie work. I sometimes have to give lectures or talks about, the other films that we've done at Pixar at schools or things like that. And one of the lessons I always say is know your ending. Know the punchline to your joke. And then design your joke around the punchline. It's much easier to figure out a story that way. Or else you're really going to be spinning your wheels trying to go front to back. And sure enough, I broke my own rule. And it wasn't because that was what I intended to do. Again, it just came around to the fact that the whole first act just sort of dropped into my lap when I wasn't supposed to be writing on it, when I was supposed to be working on another film. And, when those inspirations and ideas come to you, you just grab them when you can. But it really did set me up for a really tough journey. Jim Reardon and his story crew and Ralph Eggleston and his art department, they had to come up with a lot of the storytelling through their artwork and through all the elements that are in this film. They had to bear a lot of the storytelling as well. It was hard. They'll admit we probably went through 3 or 4 features worth of storytelling and some very different left turns, which I think you'll probably see on other parts of this disc, of what were we really trying to say. I mean, very early on as we tackled it, the big idea of WhaaLee inadvertently, for just falling in love with a character and wanting to pursue love and gain it, would accidentally, in a byproduct kind of way, bring humanity back to itself, bring humanity back to Earth. And that sort of led me to sort of Noah's Ark kind of feel of I don't know, I just kept picturing sort of like getting that olive branch from the dove and everybody knowing it's okay, it's time to go back, and then landing back on the planet and things start all over again. So I kind of knew that that was where I wanted to end up. And so I did kind of eventually get my punchline to the end of the joke, but it still wasn't clear. I hadn't really given much thought at all as to what was the state of humanity and why were they out there? Why were they not coming back? All this backstory that I really had to work hard to come around to. It was not fun, but I feel very, very happy with the final version of the story that we came around to. I always sort of equate story development to an archaeological dig, in that you kind of know that the dinosaur you want to dig up and where it is. You pick a piece on the ground, you start digging, and you bring up bones, and you start trying to piece together this dinosaur or the story that you're trying to find. But you just don't have much say about which bones you're going to get and what bones they are, and you're not given a map to know exactly what parts of the body they go to. And so if you've designed out of the bones you've pulled up out of the ground a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then at the last minute you get a bone you weren't looking for and you realize that actually your tail bones were the neck bones and that it's a Stegosaurus, it's not a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Are you going to have the guts at the last minute to shift everything around and admit that this is really the story you should be telling, that this is the dinosaur that you have, or are you just going to force it to be a Tyrannosaurus Rex, even though really you know now, and now that it's almost too late, that it's a Stegosaurus? And I think a lot of movies suffer from that. They crack their problems or they figure something out too late. Nobody has the guts or maybe even the ability to change things. And I'm very, very lucky that, I work for a place that encourages last-minute ideas, encourages 11th hour changes, because this certainly fit that. We found out we had a very different dinosaur in the whole arc of this story, and shifted it all around probably again and again through the first 2 years. And then in 2007, we did the bulk of what you see on the screen here. And all through that, our first act pretty much stayed the same. Our first act was always what it was. And that's an odd way to make a movie, but it got us to where we are. One geeky factoid about Hello Dolly, the movie, is that there was never a shot that really focused solely on their hands holding. So we were able to go into the film elements and get a nice clear image of one of the shots and just zoom in a hair tighter so that you looked a little bit more at their hands than anything else. That allowed us to make that be a real special moment for WhaaLee to focus in on. That was all. That was the only sort of little adjustment that we had to do. I'm sure that there are probably a handful of Hello Dolly aficionados out there, and they might have already caught that. Eve is actually voiced by a woman who works here, Alyssa Knight, who does a lot of scratch for us. And we knew we didn't want Eve to have a actual direct voice that you could connect to a human being, but we wanted it to have the inflections that a human being would give a voice. So the source of it is from a lot of scratch we had Alyssa do, and so sometimes we would have her say actual words or just sort of a closed-mouth vocal, and then Ben Burt would affect it, give it all the cool sort of flanging sounds and glisten effects that you associate with her, and found that sort of special identity for her. And in a weird way, we do some voice elements of WhaaLee are done the same way, but with Ben Burt's voice as the origin. I actually used to have Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head from Burt Bacharach playing over this whole moment here with the date of Eve and WhaaLee, and it played great. I can't explain it. It was the instrumental version of it on the soundtrack album. Again, it's these weird things of just being able to find a song that just, you can't explain it. It just fits in its oddity. But Tom Newman really, really wanted to give a shot at what he thought could match that or better that with score. And I was very skeptical that he could do it. And sure enough, he came up with that ba-ba-ba kind of 70s, almost doublemint gun kind of commercial score that just nailed it. Nailed it even stronger than what I had in Scratch. He's pretty amazing. It's hard for me, now that I've worked on 2 films with Tom Newman, it's hard for me to imagine I could ever work with anybody else. It's just a process that it doesn't come fast. It's very arduous for him, and there's a lot of brainstorming between him and I. What he finally comes up with, and when you hear it on the stage, you're always blown away every time, no matter how much I think I've got him figured out. He just impresses me and surprises me with more amazing choices. Because of the minimal dialogue in this film, we really felt we had to learn from the best and see the cream of the crop of silent movies. So for almost a year, the story crew and I, every lunch, would watch either a Chaplin movie or a Buster Keaton movie, and I think we even started to dip into Harold Lloyd. By then, I think we were a little spent, but I think we can pretty safely say we saw everything that either Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton ever made, that at least has made it to DVD. And it was really, really enlightening. We were already fans, but when you're looking at it with the eye of communicating an idea, of telling a story, of moving the drama forward, not just the gags, not just the surface entertainment aspect of it, but how much do you understand what's going on without dialogue and without the use of even title cards? And that was really, really informative. It's an art. It's an actual art that I think has been sort of diluted or gone away with the advent of sound, because it's an easy crutch to fall back and just say what it is that the audience needs to know. So now we're getting near the end of Act 1. I know I'm kind of cheating by making the statement that there's no life on the planet anymore, and I know technically that there's a cockroach and that it is a living thing. We were just playing off the gag that if the planet went south, the only thing living on it would be cockroaches, and so we just loved that inside joke of making the cockroach's pet. And again, I was very adamant that there be no face, there be no little character on it, that you just read into it just like you would a real insect. It's kind of hard to make a cockroach cute, and I'm amazed that we did it. We didn't pull any punches, we just sort of designed it the way a cockroach would be. And which I guess brings me to the sound. Ben Burtt did the sound for the cockroach, he did the sound for WhaaLee, he did the sound for Eve, he did the sound for pretty much anything in this movie. Another ingredient that I knew early on that I would have to have was the charm and the breadth of audio that people had seen with R2-D2 in the Star Wars movies. And early on, I also thought that I might even have humanity have lost its ability to speak whatever languages it did on Earth, and that it had some new language, and that it might be made up, and that we might not even understand it, and that we might have to interpret even the humans. So at the time, everybody was going to speak something, or either make a weird sound or speak some language that you'd never heard before. And I realized I not only need somebody like Ben Burtt, I probably need Ben Burtt. I lucked out in the sense that he lives in the area. He knows a lot of the people that I already worked with at Pixar. So we said, what could it hurt? We invited him over. I gave him the early rough pitch of this story. I didn't have a lot to show him. You know, when I think about where the story was at the time I pitched him, I got to give him a lot of credit for having faith in me. That he just sort of looked past all the flaws and still took the job. I said to him, look, I need you to be 80% of my cast. You in particular. I don't know how else I could do this without you. It turned out to be a match made in heaven. He really delivered on everything and more that I thought he might for this film. We actually spent almost a year, maybe a year and a half, while we were solving the story and reboarding it and stuff. And he would sort of see what we were coming up with for the characters, for WhaaLee and for Eve to start with, and then all the other characters, you know. And he would just come up with lots of sounds and stuff. And once he thought he had enough, I'd come over to his office and he would play me stuff. And I would sort of pick and choose what I thought was the character, and that would cull it down to a containable amount of choices. And he would sort of get what it was I liked, and then he would play off of that and sort of, again, increase the grammar. I mean, he always delivered more than we asked for, which is a godsend. You rarely get that. When we would be working on the storyboards and editing it on video, we would have this long bin full of files, like on the computer, of just all these different sounds. And it really was this weird test. For a while, it was very daunting. And my editor, Steve Schaefer, and I would just go through and go, all right, we need something that sounds sad but slightly hopeful, and then you would just go through all these sounds. Sometimes it would take minutes just to run through it all and go, that kind of sounds possibly sad and hopeful. And we'd start to give them nicknames because they were all numbered, and you'd have to start giving this sort of shorthand of, well, what was that one? And that sounds sort of like a turkey gobble. We start calling something turkey gobble, or we'd call something record scratch, and we'd start putting them in their own bin. And after a while, it became the shorthand, and just sort of through attrition, we would just naturally get to a point where we were finding ourselves always picking the same 25 to 30 sounds. And so just through sort of a natural process of storytelling needs and appeal, we found the very specific grammar and dialogue that we wanted for WhaaLee, and pretty much played off that. And then that really informed Ben, again, if we ever needed something very specific, because as we would get into certain story moments, we'd have to have a war cry from Mo, and there was no other way around it, right? And so he'd have to play with different things, but at least he knew the 6 or 7 sounds we already liked for Mo, for example. To do that for all the main characters took a long time, and it seems like ancient history now. I remember that just being most of my life for a while, and I'm sure Ben does too. Again, I don't know how we could have done this without him. I don't think we would have. We probably would have pulled the plug on this thing halfway through or something. This is so much a Ben Burtt movie. I really loved the idea of just all the robots, again, having character that you read into them. So when we would have something like Gopher, or the steward bots, which are the ones that say halt and run around on the ship. It's almost like Keystone Cops. We thought, well, let's just make the siren lights be the head, and there will be no face, and you'll kind of read into it that there's an eye or that there's some sort of face in there where the siren actually spins. And it was that kind of logic that we would always play with all the robot characters. One of our cool research things that we did for WhaaLee was we found on a website this couple. Their names are Brad and Elizabeth Soden. And Elizabeth is a paraplegic. She had been in an accident. And I guess she and her family used to like to take lots of hikes together, and they didn't want that to stop. And so her husband, Brad, invented a chair that was an all-terrain chair that she could control and drive, into the woods and still take walks with them. And they called it the tank chair. And I guess for a while he was actually building them on request. You could pay for one. And by the time we found out about him, he wasn't doing that anymore, but he offered to come over to Pixar and show off how it worked. And it kind of matched the feel and the scale and the weight of what we thought WhaaLee might be like. And it was a real benefit for us. I'm sure we'll have footage on this DVD of us goofing off with the tank chair. But I have to give them kudos for really inspiring us. We came up with some of the tiniest ideas that were really, I don't think we would have thought of, was like sort of how the wind or the dust swirls, gets this little vortex going in between the wheels and the treads when it really gets moving across the ground. And little things like that, you just wouldn't pick up unless you had some mini version of a tank driving around. So the first 2 humans that you actually see on the Axiom speaking are an artist named Jeff Pigeon. He's a storyboard artist, has been with Pixar for years, and myself. And Jeff and I are actually old college roommates. So we figured that would be a natural for us being in a conversation about, what do you want to do? I don't know what you want to do. We just had to fall into old habits to have that discussion.
Well, then what do you want to do?
I don't know. Something.
Wow.
I used programming not only literally as for WhaaLee or for Eve or for Otto, but I also used it as a metaphor that all of us fall into our habits, into our sort of routines, in a way, it's a bit of our own self-fulfilling programming, and life just can sometimes pass us by. And especially with all the distractions that happen in life now, imagine what it'll be like in the future, which is what we tried to do, and literally cocoon people in their hover chairs. I've always joked, and I can't remember anybody that didn't, once you had a remote control in the world, and especially now that we have the internet and things like Amazon where you can single click, we used to always joke, like, someday we're just going to be a thumb and a mouth. There'll be no reason to move. There'll be no reason to do anything. You can just single click and whatever you want arrives. And wherever you need to go, you get there. Or maybe you never have to leave. And so I kept thinking of all those beach chairs that usually get stacked up at like Hawaii resorts and on cruise ships. And I wanted the sense of the Axiom to have this perpetual vacation to it. You're sort of stuck in vacation hell on a cruise or at some high-end resort. And what if you never had to get out of your beach chair, your lounge chair, and you had all access to everything, even to talking to the person next to you with the screen in front of you, and the speakers almost blinded you like horse blinders on the left and the right, so that you could, everybody, it's not that different than how it feels sometimes when you're on the street of a city, like New York or something, and everybody's on their cell phone. Or you're in a commuter lane and everybody's in their car in their own private little universe, even though technically we're all very close to one another. All that programming, all that conditioning is stuff that just keeps us from connecting with the next person and dealing with the next person directly. Everything is indirect. I thought that's the thing that should be corrected by WhaaLee fighting his own programming and evolving and learning to love, and the same happening to Eve. I mean, in a way, WhaaLee doesn't really change much in this movie. He learns a little bit more about the intricacies of love and how to handle it, and that it's more about what does the other person need than what do you need. But the biggest change is really Eve. She's the one that goes through the huge change in the movie of being cold and robotic and following her directive, and then slowly realizing that that directive isn't the most important one in life, and moving over to WhaaLee.
Mary?
And that's the same thing that I have the captain do for realizing that he has a directive in life and it's not what he thinks he's doing there. It's a pretty useless job that he almost is ineffectual in and doesn't need to be there for. And that, I guess the big thing is that at this stage in the movie, the humanity's not even living. Nobody's truly living except WhaaLee. And for WhaaLee pursuing Eve, she'll soon start to be living. And then for WhaaLee being indirectly involved in the captain, he sort of wakes up and starts living. And it slowly sort of turns the tide for everybody else. This is all stuff that, I could geek out about forever. And you always want, as a storyteller, to have in the bones and hidden in the foundation of your movie. But you hope that when you're actually playing it and watching it, that stuff kind of is more subtle and it just comes through. One of the nice things about this movie, for not having a lot of people talking, is that you can't have anybody get on their soapbox and say exactly what they're thinking. You can't fall into that trap as a writer, as a storyteller. You really have to do it through action, which is great. You're doing it through drama. You're making people come to the decision themselves about where they think things are going and how they think characters are feeling. The one character that I did want to have speak, besides WhaaLee and Eve having sort of limited skills at saying single-word phrases, was Otto. I really wanted Otto to be the extreme end of programming, which would be a character that is about as soulless and as zeros and ones and binary and cold as you could make it. I don't know if everybody's familiar on Apple computers. There's this program called MacTalk, and where if you type in text, it can then speak it back to you, and it has a very cold feeling, and everything is monotone, and it kind of almost doesn't sound correct the way it speaks, and it's very soulless. And I thought that's perfect for Otto, because he really is the epitome of programming. And that was really the theme of the movie, was that irrational love defeats life's programming. It's probably obvious to all that we're big science fiction geeks, and we make nods towards many of our favorite influences.
I am good. You look gorgeous.
I loved the idea that autopilot literally looked like the steering wheel of the ship. It is the autopilot. And that in the end, the captain would fight his own wheel. I grew up in New England in a island called Cape Ann, and one of the towns next to it is Gloucester, and that's where the Captain's Courageous story comes from. There's a big statue of a captain in his rain gear holding the captain's wheel. It's the icon on all the Gorton's fish sticks. To me, that's the icon of man and his vessel. And to have that turn into a wrestling match as opposed to working together, I just thought, wow, that's just a gift. I got to use that. I got to have that be the culmination of that storyline.
Passenger count.
Unchanged.
Regenerative food buffet.
Unchanged.
Jacuzzi pH balance.
Unchanged.
Atmospheric conditions. Laundry service volume.
Unchanged.
Okay, Otto.
I did a lot of conversations with Ralph Eggleston, our production designer, who I have only worked with on all the other movies. He's just the best. And we would have conversations about the opposites of how we'd like the world of WhaaLee down on Earth to just be dirty and dusty and overexposure in the sunlight. And you could just sort of feel crust and rust on everything. And there's not a clean spot anywhere. And then to come to this ship in space, you can't get cleaner than space. It's pretty sparse. And get on the Axiom and would be these very, minimalistic hallways and stuff with a sort of indirect lighting and reflective floors and walls. In a weird way, it explains the world that Eve comes from. And it's also nice and perfect that over time it's going to feel like paradise to have come back to the real world at the end of the movie. Even though it's still dirty and it has trash everywhere, you kind of are happy to be back. It seems like you're not in this fakery anymore and you're sort of free of it. So we really sort of geeked out on all that. All the technology. It's so fun. I was very into the idea of using sort of reflective black glass to have all the graphics on the bridge console. I just thought that was the coolest look, and I hadn't seen that before in a long time in films. We actually have footage right now of Fred Willard showing. That was one of the fun things about this film. A lot of people have also asked why live action is in this film. It was frankly because I wanted WhaaLee to watch Hello Dolly. Because I knew I was going to use those songs, I wanted him to also be a fan of watching the movie, and that would explain why he had a sample of it on his box and why he played it all the time. So that has, real human beings. And I thought, well, now I've sort of set a precedent. So any footage that was pre-recorded of anything else, I felt I had to have a human in. So that's why when we have the CEO of By and Large show up, we had to have a live-action actor, and why I put live-action actors in the commercial for the Axiom at the beginning of the movie. We had a couple names of actors who we thought might best play the leader of the corporatized world, and Fred Willard's was way up there. Thank goodness he said yes. He was a dream. I mean, it was my first official live-action shoot, and I couldn't have found anybody more professional and accommodating who made it all go very smoothly, didn't make me feel like an amateur, and had a lot of patience with me. It was a pretty simple shoot to do for a first time, so thank goodness it was also that. We had to get him right in front of the podium and to get the props right, but then it was, fortunately in it, he had to be also truly reading a prompter on some of the stuff, so we could have a prompter, and it was okay to sort of catch him reading it and stuff, and we had a lot of fun. It was a real fun sort of inaugural event for Pixar, for me, and we did it we shot him twice. We shot him once, and then about 6 months later we shot him again, and then about a little less than a year later, we shot all the live action footage for all the Axiom passengers for the commercial early on. We felt we could get away with it because the humans had evolved over 700 years into what I like to call big babies. Again, I was going off the theme of if your body didn't ask for you to do anything, what would happen? And if you never had to get up, would you even remember how to walk? The other fact in science that we learned is that in zero gravity, osteoporosis kicks in. You start to have disuse atrophy is what it's called, and your bones start to sort of deteriorate and go away. And they've had to do studies with people on permanent bed rest to sort of understand how this works, because they can't study people truly out in space because there aren't. You would lose eventually almost all of your bone mass if you were out in zero gravity. And in my mind, these people weren't in zero gravity. They were in simulated gravity. But It probably wasn't a perfect working system, and that over centuries it would have an effect. So between the lack of ever having to get up for anything and ever needing to do anything for survival and being out in space for all that time, we would sort of devolve into big babies. And it also was, I thought, a good metaphor for humanity had to grow up again. Humanity had to learn to walk again in all senses of the word. And it also, babies are very appealing. If you're going to be big and round, there's nothing cuter than a baby. So we thought we'd sort of shorten the legs, get them a little elephantine, bring all the digits of the finger in. Their ears aren't fully formed. So it's really sort of regressing back to an earlier state, but at an adult size. And I thought because we were so extreme with that, we could hopefully get away with seeing live action footage and in the same world see these kind of humans. I'm sure some people would debate it, but I thought we got away with it.
I guess things go back to normal, huh?
Correct, Captain.
Well,
The other fun sort of sci-fi nod, I don't know how many people recognize this, but that is Sigourney Weaver as the voice of the ship's computer. Once I knew this film was truly going to get made and it was going to work and we had come up with the axiom and this cool sort of ocean liner in space, I knew I'd have to have a ship's computer voice, knew it had to be a sultry female voice, and knew it had to be Sigourney Weaver. She is the queen of sci-fi. There's nobody cooler than her. Everybody knows her from Alien and Aliens and all the other Alien movies, and she's royalty in the world of sci-fi. So I remember telling my producer, Jim Morris, that just hold some money, no matter where we are in production and cost, and don't spend it. And if this movie isn't a big embarrassment and I get far enough along and it seems to be working, I'd really like to offer her, if she'd be willing to, because it would probably only take a day, and record the voice of the ship's computer. And that's exactly what happened. 3 years later, we were feeling pretty good about it, and we had some money put aside. And so we called her up, sent her the script. Fortunately, there was already a trailer out for the film, so she could see what that was all about. And she said yes. And when I got to meet her and I told her this, she was like, oh, I would have said yes 3 years earlier. So, but it's probably good that we waited because it was very clear what we needed at that point. And it was just the easiest recording session. She was able to watch the footage and put in her voice. And I sort of geeked out. I said, you realize you get to be mother now, referring to Alien and the ship's computer mother on that. She got the in-joke. I'm just amazed that that wish also got fulfilled on this movie.
Sorry to terminate.
These are the reject robots. We had a lot of fun in the story department coming up with different kind of robots. We wanted to have a history to this film. We wanted you to get a sense that the world was bigger and more planned out and figured out than what you'll ever see. So there really is a logic to all of these robots that you see. There's way more robots that we've designed and that are actually in the hallways than what we even have in this repair ward. And they all have specific functions. Some of them are service bots that stay behind the scenes in sort of the hallways that go straight from room to room. And a lot of the other ones are ones that actually go straight to the public areas and would be more of open service bots that would help you get your drink or sweep up after you or whatever else might be needed. The umbrella bot, for example, would give you shade. We had to have a way of showing that they were the broken ones. They were the defective ones. They were the lovable losers that band behind WhaaLee. So we came up with these red boots, I would call them, sort of like a boot that gets put on the tire of a car if you've been parked in the wrong zone or something. And they would be almost like a ball and chain for a prisoner in a cartoon. They would sort of help you identify these robots from another and say that these guys are ex-cons. These guys are guys that have broken out and should be locked up. It also helped show that Eve was a fugitive, so that when she had this red thing on, you would be reminded, because again, we don't have dialogue. We don't have anybody saying, oh my gosh, you broke out and you are a fugitive and we must hide you. We don't have any of that luxury. Everything had to have a visual symbol to remind the audience of how the story was advancing, changing, and where we were at in the story with different characters' states and stuff. And it turned into to be a happy accident for us, because later on in the film, she had to be shut down and rebooted in the garbage area, and we didn't think of how to do that. And then we suddenly realized we had these bright little yellow buttons on her boot, and we thought, oh, what if you could press that and it would just turn you off, like any machine? So we went back into the repair ward scene. When she was first brought into the room, we added the step of somebody shutting her off and then bringing her into the diagnostics room and then turning her back on, just to set up and show the audience that that's what that function did, so that we could use it later. That's the other nice thing about working on a movie long enough, is that you can take advantage of things that you need in the back half of the movie and go back in earlier stuff and set it up, and you look like you had it planned that way all along. One of our nasty little secrets. Really, really early on, I got Jeremy Lasky and Danielle Feinberg as my directors of photography. And at Pixar, those are two separate duties that get split up, is the lighting and the staging. So Jeremy would be dealing with the camera and its placement and movement and any staging that's seen in the lens. And Danielle would be in charge of sort of the lighting and how anything was lit and where your eye was focused. And we made sure that we talked together early, almost maybe a year before they had to execute anything, about what look we were going for. And they got infected pretty quick with my enthusiasm about wanting to play what I would say in a pool of subtlety that we had not done to such degree and to such length before in other films. We weren't doing anything that hadn't been done before in a Pixar film, but I wanted it to feel like that was the foundation, that was just the overall feel of the movie throughout, was this very shallow focus. And everything has this very soft, intimate feel, regardless of what the actual environment is that they're in. And that was like a light bulb going off in my head. I thought if I could play with that visual grammar, I would be able to achieve intimacy at any point in this big sci-fi with lots of metal and lots of electric machines and things that aren't able to give their exact expression to the way that we see humans. You could compensate by getting intimacy with the way the shots were being filmed and lit. And so a lot of research went into how to achieve that via Jeremy and Danielle. This is one of my favorite looking scenes, the escape pod bay. Just the bright light and the whole environment. This is the first set on the Axiom that we brought into full production, and it really inspired us. We've been spending almost a year to 2 years on Earth with trash, with everything looking like crap, but in a good way. After a while, you start thinking, is that all the film's going to be? And then we did this set, and it just got everybody so excited. We suddenly said, oh, okay, there's a whole nother world to be doing, and it kind of dictated how we did the rest of the film. The reason we put the plant in a boot, that was an idea from Jim Reardon, who co-wrote the film with me. Jim thought it would be a nice little statement of man walking again, man putting his foot on the moon kind of reference, and knowing that that was going to be the big turn at the end, that the captain was going to stand up and start to walk, and that all of humanity would start to have to get up and walk again. So it was a bit of a portentous symbol in the beginning of the film.
Cruising speed. You are now free to move about the cabin.
Again, we have Sigourney Weaver in the escape pod. This is some of the fun stuff for us. We really geek out that you get to design all this cool technology. We just knew we had to be out in space. Something has to get us back out in space. We can't just travel through it and tease the audience at the head of Act 2 with WhaaLee getting to the Axiom and then not come back out into space. So it was a bit of a gratuitous choice to just shoot him out, and then we had to sort of go into the story and go, come on, we got to make a reason she would send him back home, and it kind of helped the whole storyline that he just seems to be making problems and not making anything better, and it might just be best if he just go back home. So it gave us a good excuse to sort of at least get him out into space and move a couple other subplots along. And then we had to figure out, well, how the heck is he going to move around in space? And we remembered that we had done the fire extinguisher in the first act. So we put a fire extinguisher in the escape pod, and now it's become one of the most memorable scenes, and it's a big icon for and a big symbol in all the marketing. It's her with her sort of circular blue rays in space and him with the fire extinguisher. I know we're breaking rules at the same time that we're following rules for space. We fully expect that we will be offending the true scientists out there. We let there be sound in space. We let there be flames in space. But at the same time, we try to play with some stuff, just the fact that there's no gravity, play with the fact that if you were to shoot an extinguisher, everything would just crystallize right away, and it gave us a really sort of fantasy romantic setting. That's what made us put the Axiom by a nebula, and we're probably completely playing with scale with the nebula, but still, it works for the movie. It gives you the excuse to have these really romantic colors out there and have it almost a dream sequence. So between the way that both of them fly and leave trails and the way that the nebula looks as a backdrop to the Axiom, it just really helps set the tone for what we needed to go on with their relationship, that she can't help but be infected by how fun he is and how clever and curious he is. And that brought us with the whole idea of turning the camera work to the side and letting the retro thrusters of the engine actually feel sort of like fountains if you turn them vertically. It just all started to organically fall into place, you know, letting a couple other humans wake up and meet one another. I used to have this to a old Bing Crosby song of Stardust, and then for a while an Ella Fitzgerald song. But Tom Newman really wanted to score something here, and when we really looked at the film, we thought, you know, it would make more sense that whatever theme you play when he first sees Eve fly on the planet, that you would reprise it in some way when the two of them fly around the Axiom, because he's kind of getting to join her now, and that would give you a little bit of an advancement in their relationship just emotionally and musically. Before we had finished the movie, I had wanted to have Peter Gabriel do the end song for the movie. Suddenly it made all sense as this film got together that he would be the perfect choice for an end song, and even more so if maybe he did something with Tom Newman, because I know they were both fans of each other. And we actually got to make that work, and the song they wrote we loved so much, and we loved the melody, that Tom got inspired and went back and rescored Eve flying. So the tune, even if you don't connect it, that you're hearing when Eve flies on the planet for the first time while WhaaLee watches her, is the song at the end of the movie. And then when the two of them fly around the Axiom, it's an even fuller version of that same tune. So there's a nice synergy through the whole film, this nice arc playing through the whole thing. Again, it just only makes the film stronger as a whole. Now I can't imagine it any other way. So coming up is a little robot that's a gag of being left outside, and his name is Bernie. We actually gave him that name after the movie was over because we realized we wanted to do a short that would sort of be a Rosencrantz Guildenstern gag of what happened through this whole movie while Bernie was stuck outside. And so for those of you watching this from the DVD, which I assume you are, you will see that short if you haven't watched it already, because it would probably make more sense to watch it after the movie. Another staple, I think, is John Ratzenberger. People always want to know where John Ratzenberger is going to be a voice for in the movie. He's pretty obvious in this one. He's the voice of John, and it's the first time he's played a character in any of our movies where he gets to have his own first name. John and Mary are the two humans that sort of meet each other and fall in love, and John gets to play John. And I think the last clue in here is the Pizza Planet truck, which you'll notice the Pizza Planet truck when Eve is looking for something on the planet. She scans everywhere. It's a very quick shot of her throwing down the hood of the Pizza Planet truck. That was the easiest one to put in because it was just part of the trash. Okay, coming up is probably one of the only times I was able to allow Jeff Garlin to improv. It's one of the funnier moments that I think his character has when he's alone with the ship. He's a very good improv artist, and I feel a little bad that I didn't give him enough to be able to play that aspect of his talents, but it's still pretty funny.
Prepare for landing. We're here, everybody.
We're now kind of getting into probably the most talky scene in the film. We always called it Eve interrogation, which makes no sense because it was from an old scene where Eve actually used to be interrogated by the captain. It's morphed over the years, and it's really should be called The Captain Wakes Up. This is his scene for really realizing what his calling is. Jeff Garlin is the voice of the captain. Most people know him as Larry David's agent, also named Jeff, in Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO. And most kids would know him as one of the counselor parents in Daddy Daycare. I met him at the premiere for Nemo in Los Angeles, and he was just a huge fan of the film, and I was a huge fan of his work, and he just turned out to be the funniest, nicest guy. we kind of kept in touch with him. One of our coworkers here, Lee Unkrich, who was a co-director with me on Nemo, wanted to figure out how to direct actors and deal with improv acting, and he's a real authority on that. So he started doing some projects on the side with him. So we got to know him a little better, and we kind of knew him as a friend. And when I had to start doing a voice for the captain, I kind of wanted Jackie Gleason in a weird way, and I knew I couldn't get him. Jackie Gleason is no longer alive, but that's kind of the person I was thinking of. And I couldn't come up with names. We went through lots of names, listened to lots of voices. And then on one list, suddenly I saw Jeff's name. And it just suddenly struck me. I'm like, oh my gosh, Jeff. I mean, I hadn't even thought of it. And the minute I did, I knew right away that was it. That's the guy. I need somebody that can play lazy, that can play sort of unmotivated. But inside you sense a kindness, a charm, an appeal. Because in truth, in real life, he's not like that. And he's very gregarious and very fun and just a lot of life to him. And I said, wouldn't that be cool if you could sort of reveal that over time and sort of turn him into that over the course of the film? Actually, I was pretty honored to take the role. He's a big fan of ours, and I'm happy that I could fulfill that wish for him. But I would have hired him even if that wasn't the case, or begged him to take the role, because now it just fits. We've actually, you probably sense a little bit of, it almost looks like him. And that tends to happen not so much from the actual design. The same thing happened with us with Ellen DeGeneres and Dory, is the animators will watch video of the actors when they're recording the vocals in our dialogue recording sessions. And they'll watch sort of the little facial tics that they have, the way their mouths move, or just anything, that's kind of an attribute to the way that they act. And a lot of times they'll incorporate more often than not the very subtle stuff. And then you see that applied in the animation, and you get a real sense of like, wait a minute. A lot of people thought Dory looked like Ellen, and a lot of people think that the captain looks like Jeff. And I have to attribute most of that to the animators for just how they really captured his style of expression and speaking. He was a tough character to get right. It's hard to play lazy and not have it seem simple in your vocals. Almost monosyllabic is how we played him for a while, because we wanted him that lazy, and it came across as dumb. Because you're reading into everything, because you don't know what's happened to humanity in 700 years. You don't know what the rules are. We found that whenever we played something almost kind of, I guess, Homer Simpson-esque, people would just assume, okay, humanity got dumb. Humanity got really dumb, and then people would not like humanity, or especially the captain representing humanity. So we finally just stopped trying to do things like that and learned how to make him just come across tired, but still very vocal, has a broad range of vocabulary, but just unmotivated at first. And it really kind of opened our eyes to how we should be playing the captain.
Otto, he found the plant. Fire up the hollow detector.
Not necessary, Captain.
I'm sure most fans know that A113 is something we put in all the films. It's the most direct we've ever done it is in this film. We actually make it the secret code for staying out in space and not returning to Earth. And that used to be a room at California Institute of the Arts, which is an alma mater of many of us at Pixar who were animators and went to the animation school there. And A113 was the room where we all had classes. And Brad Bird started that by putting it on a license plate, I think, in Family Dog and The Amazing Stories. And then we sort of carried the tradition into the Toy Story movies, and everybody's done it since.
Just cut it off, will you?
So all this information that Fred Willard is saying, the CEO of By and Large, in an older version of the movie, this information was told in the middle of the movie, sort of earlier in Act 2, and it was privately witnessed by Otto. Well, we suddenly showed Otto with the plant, and he went down into the bowels of the brains of the ship and watched this footage, and then had the plant given to Gopher to be disposed of. And it was called Secret Files. And all the same information that Fred's saying was in it. And we just found that it was just too much for the audience to have to hold that information and hang on to it and then try to apply it later. And we kind of needed the captain to find out about that information. So it just made sense to see if we could just keep it a mystery till as far as we could and then have all that information come out all at once. But you can see Secret Files on this DVD. I put it in the deleted scenes.
No. The plan.
No. Wait a minute.
I always like when all the messages that were sent, and the last one is the last, it's all red and it says read me, like it's really important.
700 years ago.
So this is the big speech. This is the most dialogue in the film. It was a tough one to nail. We had been so used to not having to solve all story problems and communicate all needs without dialogue or with weird sounds that to suddenly have a scene where there was a lot of dialogue, it took Jim Merton and I a while to sort of get our heads around it and not have it be too verbose, not have it be too wordy, because it's suddenly the fact that you got to speak made you wanted to keep speaking. So probably go down in Pixar history with the smallest cast ever in this film.
My directive.
A lot of the portraits in the back are all employees of Pixar that agreed to let us use them as one of the captains and didn't mind if we stretched their faces or expanded them and made them feel like you could sort of see the evolution of man over the 700 years, getting larger and rounder. And then if you ever get a chance to still frame, which I'm sure some of you do, on the names that are under the captains, all the last names are guys from our story crew. So you can probably attach the last name to the end credits of our story department. This is a 40-second gap in the DVD that I have no idea how to fill it. And so I was just going to sort of waste your time and keep talking until the 40-second gap is filled up and it gets to the next interesting point. And that's how we do these things on DVDs. So actually I'm at 25 seconds now, so I have to kind of keep talking until it gets to 40 seconds. You guys can even count with me. So now we're at 31, 32. Isn't this fascinating? This is probably the only time in the disc I had to do this. For those of you that are still listening, bye. We had a last-minute change that was a big change to the story after we had a preview screening in Portland. I actually had Eve be the one that was shocked by Otto and thrown down the trash, and WhaaLee never made it up to the room. WhaaLee was waiting for her at the base of the trash chute and saw her fall. And actually, he was starting to climb up the trash chute, and she fell on top of him, and then the two of them were hanging from the chute, and then fell, and Mo witnessed this and jumped in after them. So if you can imagine, I think it'll be on this disc, is this entire scene in the garbage airlock with the roles reversed. WhaaLee falls, wakes up and sees Eve in a cube and races into the airlock and tries to pull her out, and then Mo comes in and saves them. To be honest, that's why in one of the trailers of the movie, you actually see Mo get caught, and then WhaaLee and Mo shake hands while Mo is still stuck in the door. That's from the old version, and when they were cutting the trailer, that's what we still had. But it became clear to me that I had a major bone broken in the story. I had to realize, wait a minute, this is about the effect WhaaLee has on everybody else in the film, and I have to have Eve come around to realizing that her directive no longer is putting this plant. It should be what's best for WhaaLee, because she loves him. And what would be the strongest thing would be that WhaaLee is hurt, that there's no way to fix him, unless they go back to Earth where the parts are. Sure, she'll still take the plant and put it in the holodetector, but it's no longer to do anything but to get WhaaLee back home. And so you'd get this sense that he's really had an effect on her, and that she's really now finally aligned with him for how strongly she feels love for him versus, in comparison to him feeling love for her. They're finally matched. Once I realized that, and I also, the other benefits that came out of that was having WhaaLee be able to come up the chute and be in the same scene with the captain and with Eve. And then the three of them could kind of almost become a united front, even though they didn't really have a plan yet. They all had the same desire to stop Otto. So that when suddenly WhaaLee's hurt and Eve is flying with the plant trying to go back to put it in the holodetector, and the captain suddenly comes on the screen and says, you get there and put it in the holodetector, and I'm going to try and stop Otto and activate it. You felt this sense of like, okay, all roads have come together. All people are working together. All the good guys are now working on it. And that was a huge win. And the other big win was that because you really do feel that WhaaLee is not in a good way, that you don't know how hurt he is, and you think he can't be good, and he's very weak, it would only make him more impressive and heroic to use every ounce of strength that he has to stop that holodetector from going back into the ship and hold it there and lift it up. And it would only make it that much more inspirational for the audience and for the captain to stand up and walk. So again, WhaaLee would be having an effect on everybody else in the film. This became kind of obvious to me after the screening and after some advice from some of the other filmmakers here. And they didn't really have an answer for how to do it. I've just explained to you how I answered it, but they kind of knew that that was the shift that had to happen, was that it really should be about everybody that WhaaLee has affected coming together for WhaaLee's sake at the end of the movie. And once I heard that, I go, oh, they're right. They're absolutely right. And that's sort of my analogy of being able to realize that, for all the bones that I have, I was trying to make a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and now I realize it's a Stegosaurus, and was I going to have the guts to shift it all? And I got to keep giving kudos to my crew, especially my animators and my lighters. Those two departments were the most hit. They had done all this work on about a sequence and a half of stuff that had to change completely. And I pitched it to him and kind of begged him, like, this is going to make the film so much better. And I figured that if it was the right answer, it would sell itself. They would know that made more sense. And God bless them, they did. They all saw it, that the way that it would improve the film greatly. And we made all those changes. So the DVD people are happy because now they have sort of deleted scenes and stuff that we can put on the disc, and gives you guys some cool stuff to sort of see how messy and how much we get things wrong even to the last minute. But I'd like to think it doesn't really matter what we do, and as long as the right stuff gets to the screen and to the theaters for all you guys. So here we are in a sequence we called Showdown. I don't know, we seem to have a lot of sequences in different movies that use this title, Showdown. It's become this ubiquitous title. There were actually two stages of dealing with what we call the steward robots, the sort of policing robots in this. They first confronted them in the hallway, and we made it an even quicker gag of the massage bot getting rid of them. And then they got out onto the economy class where all the billboard signs and the balconies are, and suddenly every steward in the ship was there. It was hundreds of stewards, and they sort of locked them in this force field ray. And the captain got them free by pressing a button, and then all the stewards ended up getting knocked over the balcony by all the sleeping, passengers as they came out of their rooms snoring. But for economy, we just put it all in one moment in the hallway, and I think it plays better for that. Actually, the rejects, which is what we call all the broken robots that sort of band together with WhaaLee, were sort of it took a while for us to figure out who we wanted all those bots to be. In a weird way, I think, if I remember correctly, the rejects that we picked came from just sort of a gag session of sitting around with different artists and drawing things and finding things that would sort of be very clear function-wise. You'd have to look at them very quickly and get exactly what they did. So some of the requirements that make a reject bot be cast the way they were was right away I could tell it was a vacuum cleaner, I could tell that was a light, I could tell that paint bot painted things. And then sometimes the idea was so clever, like the beautician bot, where we had these pre-recorded voices of a person listening and giving just vague enough comments that they could probably work for anybody. We just love that conceit so much that that's bizarre enough that we have to set those up. So we actually have to put those characters somewhere earlier in the movie. But the combination of all those robots really sort of dictated the look and the range of what kind of robots would be on the ship. And sort of from that group, we extrapolated and made our designs. We loved the massage bot. Finally, it's like the Tasmanian devil. Allow him to go free and just go nuts.
Look what I got, Otto!
The characters group and the modelers really came up with this cool system so that we could afford to do this. I guess there's no better way to put it than Lego pieces. We'd have these sort of robot Lego pieces that we could mix and match and make hundreds of robots out of just a few pieces. About maybe 24 pieces, maybe a little bit more than that. One of our animators is a Lego builder on the side, Angus McLean, and he really got into figuring that all out, and he did a great job. So there were actually a lot of gags thought up for the Captain fighting Otto. We had a lot of fun with how you could fight your wheel. And just because there were so many stages to this sequence, and it had to sort of build and compound and get to the point, which was the hollow detector coming up and WhaaLee holding himself under it, we had to sort of reduce it to our best 2 or 3 gags. And that happens a lot on these films. Usually the film's better off for it, for getting down to its essence and just economizing it. We're now in the big third act, climax. Everything all comes together. This stuff was really hard. This is where we sort of saved all our dollars to give thousands and thousands of human beings and passengers on their chairs. We actually used the massive software that WhaaLee uses, Peter Jackson's company down in New Zealand. We incorporated it into our system, our Menvi system, and we were able to make this possible. We've never done something of this size, and it actually pales in comparison to the scope and scale that I know that WhaaLee's done on stuff. But for us, it was quite an undertaking, and sort of saved our butts. We used to actually have the ship tilt a lot more when we were first laying this out, and it just looked too dangerous. It looked like people must be dying for falling. The only nice thing about it is that we had this one homage to the Poseidon Adventure. I don't know, I grew up with the, I think it was the ABC or NBC nightly or Friday night movie, and it would always show that guy fall from a table into the ceiling light from the Poseidon Adventure, and we had a sort of a gel fall away from one of his chairs, and that was a good gag. But other than that, it was just too severe. This was, for me, not an ending that I saw coming right away when I was writing, the idea of tilting the ship. But the minute it kind of came to me, I think it was when we were in the middle of figuring out that we wanted the captain to fight his own wheel, that I realized the only real options that Otto has besides controlling the ship through buttons and controls is that he can literally spin the ship to one side or the other. And it just sort of was like a light bulb going off in my head that would force everybody out of their chairs, and it would force all of humanity in one swift stroke to wake up. Because that was always the byproduct of what I wanted the love story between Eve and WhaaLee to do. I always wanted it to have a positive effect on humanity. So for them trying to put this plant in the hollow detector, and for WhaaLee in a weakened state be the only option for wedging himself under it and not letting it go away completely and turn off, it inspires not only the captain to stand up, but it gets everybody else, after they've been thrown out of their chairs, to sort of get back to a level state and have no other choice but to try and stand up on their 2 feet. And you're sort of witnessing the baby generation of humanity in the future go into the toddler phase. It was just too good. It was too organic, and it just seemed like that's it. I don't think I ever questioned another climax after that. We started out with a gag of putting 2001 under the captain standing, and it worked so well. Because a lot of times we do gags, and we go, now we should sort of smarten it up a bit or not be so obvious. But in a weird way, that 2001 music, it literally gets cheers. When we had a test audience, a guy in front of me stood up and started punching the air. So it was so effective that when you see something like that happen, you go, well, I'm not changing anything. We're going to pay whatever fees we need to pay, and we're going to use it, because it's just, when you hit it, you hit it. I should probably talk about writing with my partner, Jim Reardon. Jim and I go way back. He and I went to college together, and Jim was probably the smartest, funniest guy I'd ever met, and probably still have ever met. And he went off when we graduated to write for the Saturday morning show, The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, for Ralph Bakshi, which was amazing to us because we had all been spending years trying to be animators, and wow, one of us became a writer. And he shocked me by asking me to work with him and also be a writer on the show, which I'd never considered. He then went off to be a very well-known director on The Simpsons for over a decade, while I went up to Pixar here. And I just have, he'd probably tell you himself, I tried from my first day walking into the building at Pixar to sort of get him to come up and work at Pixar. And he did his stint with the Yellow Man, as he likes to call it. And now we're the beneficiaries of his knowledge and wit. And it was just absolute joy to try and write this movie with him. I can't imagine how we would have solved it if he wasn't there. Here's our big landing of the Axiom. To me, there's certain things that if you do in a movie, you have to fulfill them. It's sort of the old adage of if you see a gun on the table in Act 1, somebody's got to use it and shoot it by Act 3. And I felt the same way for showing an empty landing pad at the beginning of the movie with where the Axiom had once taken off from into space. To me, that was sort of a promise that it's got to come back to Earth and it's got to land and it's got to be majestic and huge and be a modern-day Ark. This shot right here, I always wanted this sense of just a bunch of toddlers sort of waddling out onto the ramp. And whether you get that directly or not, it didn't matter. I think it just would feel right.
WhaaLee.
For a long time, we had WhaaLee broken, or actually just completely out, not working anymore. And Eve raced in and fixed him, and he was back to normal. And once he woke up, he looked up, and he was himself, and then noticed the hole in the roof, and kind of gave Eve a look like, what the heck, why is there a hole in my house? And she sort of blocked it from his view and said, never mind, and they held hands, and the movie was over, and that was it. And it didn't have that much punch because you know these kind of movies are going to have a happy ending. You just don't know how you're going to get there and how exactly that happy ending is going to get defined. And it was in one of our brain trust sessions that it got sort of stated by a couple people that the thing about machines is that you know you can fix them. So even if you're not thinking about it too hard, unconsciously you just know that it's going to be okay, or that the problem can be solved if something happens to any of our characters because they're machines and somehow, some way you can fix them. But what if they are reset and they lose their memory? What if they lose who they are? Because who they are is no longer really about their outside. It's their inside. That's the thing that you're charmed with by WhaaLee. It's who you grow to like about Eve and any of the other machines. And that's the thing that truly can be at risk and with no promise and understanding of can you get it back. And we all understand our computers crashing or some kind of machine getting reset and you losing all the information that you once had. And it just sent a chill down my spine to suddenly tap into that and realize that's our ending. That's the thing that's really always been at risk, is their relationship, and which is basically who they are with each other. I thought, the audience is ready to buy the combination of just love, the mysterious elements of love, and the science of there just being a missing spark, a last-minute little kind of defibrillator kind of jolt to kick in the last circuit on WhaaLee. And so this hand-holding and kiss, or the equivalent of a kiss by them touching with a little electric shock, I felt the audience would want and would buy in the end of their story. And you would feel that entire equation was the missing little step that for WhaaLee to fully come back. And I'm a sucker for these kind of stories. So we certainly, of course, like we always do, went back into the film and set up all this stuff so that it would all feel organic and intentional through the whole movie. And it was nice. It was nice to end the movie so quiet and just spend a lot of time with each of these shots. We found ourselves constantly adding more time and just really taking its time, because in a weird way, that's what we did at the beginning of the movie, and it has a nice symmetry to it. It kind of brings it back down to its essence, and you feel like, regardless of the state of humanity and all these people being on Earth now, it's back down to just the two of them on their own little island, whether it's just emotional now or real. I didn't mention the hand-holding, but because we had our two main characters not be able to express how they feel about one another, and you can't say I love you, I had to come up with a visual for that. And by seeing the two lovers hold hands in that song in Hello Dolly, and knowing that that's one of the most intimate displays of affection you can have in public, is to hold hands. You'll typically see a couple, if they're not that serious, they don't hold hands. But when they're starting to get serious, suddenly they're holding hands in public. It's a pretty public expression of how much somebody feels about another person. And I thought that was the best way to show that. So that's why we used that as their way of communicating to one another. Or for us as the audience to know how far along is the relationship getting. What is WhaaLee's intentions and how does Eve feel about him yet, So her learning to hold hands and learning what it means and then to suddenly do it back is basically saying, I love you. So we're now in the end credits. We had a couple screenings where it was interesting. Half the audience would decide that humanity was still in a bad way, going to eventually just live for maybe a couple weeks, and then they'd all die out because they didn't seem too smart. And then the other half wanted to be very optimistic that they'd figure it all out and do it right this time. So I didn't want to change the movie. I liked the way I had ended it. So what felt like a nice little sort of security blanket for those that see the glass as half empty was to extend the epilogue into the credits. And Jim Capobianco, who did Your Friend the Rat, the short on the Ratatouille DVD, was kind enough to take on the end credits here. And he had the idea of telling how they figured out how to survive and thrive again through the retelling of the history of art. And so he starts out with the cave paintings and then goes on to hieroglyphics and, Grecian sort of urns, all the way to Da Vinci and sketches. And finally, we felt Impressionism was probably the most poetic and best depiction of paradise that you could make, so we just ended it there. And I, somewhere in 2005, had gotten an email from Peter Gabriel, who had finally seen Finding Nemo and was a big fan of it, and which I was completely honored because I've been a big fan of his my entire life. He's probably one of the, if not my favorite, one of the top 3 musicians I've ever been a huge fan of, and I have all his albums. So he asked me for some advice on some stuff that he was doing. And in the postscript, after I had given that advice, he sort of said, if you ever want a song in one of your films, let me know. And I was like, oh, I will. And I didn't want to throw that opportunity away just gratuitously, just for the chance to meet him. So I sort of sat on that offer for years. And as I was working on this movie, kind of kept looking for, is there an opportunity for that to happen? And when these end credits came up, because by then I had resigned myself that there wasn't an opportunity to bring him in, it suddenly just made all the sense. All his work with WOMAD and all this world music that he's sort of supported and pushed out into the outside world and made popular just made a lot of sense to sort of have this global, sophisticated touch with a lot of integrity to the music, because he's a smart guy. So I pulled in that favor, and thank goodness he said yes, because it's a match made in heaven to me, this music. And going along with these credits, I couldn't improve upon it. And so it is a cherry on top of the sundae at the end of all this for me. And hopefully you enjoy it too. It's very soul-searching to look at your film after it's all done. The analogy's been used a million times, but it's so true. It's basically like having a kid and then sending it off to college. And it graduates, and you're kind of sitting there looking like a proud parent, with your spouse and going, wow, look what we did. That's sort of how I feel very much so right now, but with a lot of parents. I mean, there's about over 200 people that have worked on this film, and maybe a third of them have been on it almost the entire time I have, for nearly 4 years. And that's quite an investment to make, and it certainly makes it go down easier when you spend that much time on a film, when it comes out good, and when it comes out like what you had hoped for, like what you had wished for, and often even better than what you had thought it would be. And WhaaLee's definitely one of those. There's something about this movie that is so fresh, so original, and it has always been from every day that it was a thought in my head to when it started to be realized. There was something just really unique and special about it. And I'm really hoping that it stays as unique and special as it does to us now for a long time. And I think that's the fuel. I think it's a fuel that got me through it, that got everybody else working through it. And you just knew you were on something unique. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. From an artist's standpoint, that's a pretty great place to play in, is unique. And I can't thank everybody that worked on it enough. I will probably be thanking them forever. I lucked out that they were at the top of their game. A lot of these guys I've worked with have been fellow employees for over 10, 15 years, some of them. And I just feel like they've just become Olympic level champions at whatever it is they do. And to watch them do their job and to see them excel at stuff they were struggling with or started to do early in their career, and then just to be professionals and masters at their craft now is really exciting, and to benefit from that is the best. So I want to thank everybody that worked on the film for helping realize this little robot in the middle of the universe. Just can't thank you enough. And thank you all for watching.